Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today on Jay Slay Made in the USA, where we explore truth, expose deception, and inspire courage. As many of you know, I have been digging into this issue of the issue of Israel and of Zionism and terms, and what do these terms mean, and what's the real powers in the world right now. And on my journey, I began to get really interested in the whole situation with Israel, in terms of the recent sense of the matter and the historical sense of the matter, based on what I began to see was a strong dual citizenship and Israeli influence on our own U.S. government. Because hey, I'm an America First guy. I believe we should support our nation and have national sovereignty, all those things. I've also always been a big supporter of Israel, just in general, based on my biblical upbringing, the politics that I held. It seemed like everybody that I held in esteem supported Israel, and also the way that I was taught was, hey, you've got a bunch of hateful barbarians with these massive countries who are Islamic, and they are wanting to wipe Israel off the map. And then the scenes that I would see is this beautiful white and blue flag with that Star of David. And it would bring me back in my mind to this biblical imagery of David and Goliath. And we've got to support God's chosen people. And that's so from a very emotional place that tapped into my Christian beliefs. I just wanted to support Israel. But then I began to look at policy in the United States, and I began to look at all these people that, called themselves Jewish or were Jewish, that had all these positions of power, and they were making decisions that seemed to be against our own interests here in America. So that's my story of how I got interested. And along that journey, I discovered a speech, a talk that Alison Weir, who is the founder of If Americans Knew, she gave this talk. I believe it was at Stanford University a few years ago, and it described her story of back in 2001, traveling to Gaza, staying there for some time. And I'm going to let her share that story. But it gave real statistics, real numbers from in what I perceived as a very non-biased point of view, just simply wanting to lay out the facts, believing that if Americans knew the truth, that they might think about these things differently. So real quickly, I'm going to give just a little bit of professional background, then we're going to bring Alison on. So If Americans Knew was founded by American freelance journalist Alison Weir, who traveled independently throughout the West Bank and Gaza Strip in February and March of 2001. Imagine that timing with 9/11 just around the corner. There she found a situation largely the reverse of what was being reported in the American media. As she continued to examine this issue, she read dozens of books on the topic and found the U.S. press portrayal was significantly at odds with the information being reported by media throughout the rest of the world. And this disturbed her greatly because she felt that the American public was being misinformed and uninformed on one of the most significant issues affecting them today, and discovered a systemic problem with all of it. So she founded this organization to be directed by Americans without personal or family ties to the region, who would research and actively disseminate accurate information to the American public. So what they do, guys, is they produce informational materials. They assist in organizing public forums, produce media studies, and they provide speakers and written materials to hundreds of venues across the United States, including, major universities, churches, press clubs, postgraduate schools, and other civic organizations in every region of the United States. So thank you for that belabored and long intro. And with that, Alison, I am so honored to have you on the show today. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
I want to start with your background. Okay, so that's intriguing. You began to read about what was going on. You had some interest. I think you lived on the West Coast, maybe you still do, and said, I'm just going to take off and see this for myself. Tell me about how that happened.
That's right. It's funny, whenever I tell people about this, including Palestinian Americans, they're pretty shocked when they hear what I did.
I bet.
But you know how you make decisions that just seem right at the time and didn't seem unusual to me. Like you, I was pro-Israel. We grew up very aware of the Nazi Holocaust and how horrible that was. And I think from my Christian upbringing, feel a strong responsibility to do good, and certainly not to support evil. So I grew up pro-Israel, but not knowing much about it. I'd never been to that region and didn't know much about it. But then as it mentions, in fall of 2000, when it was in the headlines the way it sort of is now, periodically, Israel's a big big news item. And my youngest son had just started college and was off, so I had a little more time. And just out of curiosity, I began looking at thinking, well, I've never really understood Israel Palestine. I think I'll read these news reports. Normally, I probably would have just skipped over, just saw the headlines. And my background is journalism. So when I actually read the articles, and I used to listen to NPR all the time, I noticed that I was hearing the Israeli perspective all the time. And I wanted to hear the full story. I wanted to know from and about Israelis, but I also knew, well, Palestinians are involved. I want to hear from and about them. I just want to decide for myself and learn what's going on.
How
And
did
I
you realize,
noticed
Alison, that everything you were reading was from the Israel perspective? What tipped you off on that?
just in reading it and listening to it, they would interview Israelis. They'd give what the Israeli military was saying. They'd focus on Israeli deaths that were really
Okay.
tiny, as it turns out. And you almost never heard a Palestinian quoted or heard anything from them. So as a journalist, you just notice, well, wait, they're just going to one side of this conflict, and we're not hearing all of it. It was just when I read the whole article, instead of just getting the information in a cursory way,
Right.
and listening to NPR. It was Linda Gradstein who was reporting from Israel itself, and clearly was pro-Israel. As I've looked into her more, I've learned she's extremely pro-Israel. I believe she's married to an Israeli former military man. So,
Okay. Right.
so the Google was very new at that time. This was late 2000, early 2001, and but I thought, well, I think I'll go on this new thing, the internet, and see what I can learn. It was so new, and but it was I already learned it was really an excellent resource if you knew, just looked into it. So by doing that, I got reports from the region itself, from Israeli media, from Palestinian media. There are a lot of human rights organizations, there are Christian organizations on the ground, Palestinian groups, etc. So you could get the news, and especially from the Israeli media, Israeli newspapers, Haaretz, especially is in English, Times of Israel is in English. So, and they reported, I don't think they covered up quite as much, especially some of them. So I started learning that what was actually going on there, which was very different than the impression that we were being given by US media. And I looked into it more. I discovered at that time that we gave Israel $8 million per day. Now it's about $11 million per day. And nobody knew that. We had been giving Israel far more of our tax money than to any other country.
Now,
Normally we would
what
know
was the
that.
year that you looked into that and discovered those numbers?
That was in fall of 2000.
Okay. So that was around 8 million
And
per day.
2001.
And then you're saying now, and I read on your website, up to 15 million a day by some estimates. Okay.
That's right. And by some estimates, if you include how much money we expend on behalf of Israel, because half of the money goes directly to Israel. They get it. But then there's another 10 million per day approximately that we expend because it will benefit Israel. That's the reason it was expended. Not because it would benefit the United States, not because it would benefit the world, but because it would be good for Israel. Pro-Israel congressmen, propose it, and it passes through, and some of the arrangements by which we got Egypt to stop supporting Palestinian rights by buying off Egypt with a massive amount of money that goes to Egypt on behalf of Israel, because that's an agreement that continues. The same thing that went on with Jordan. We gave Jordan lots of money because it bought it off from supporting Palestinians and would, as it's called, normalize relations with Israel. Then there are a lot of projects that go to Israel that are sort of buried in these budget bills are enormous, so you have to look through them. And you find lots of things in there that are done for Israel. So really, I would say that looking at, our tax money, I would actually say $20 million per day are going either half of it's to Israel, half of it's because of Israel.
And when you say
It's
to
probably more
Israel,
than that.
that's not just aid to help people that have been hurt in attacks. That's
No.
to support government initiatives. of Israel,
Yeah,
correct?
specifically military.
Military. Okay.
Yeah, when I started out, it was half so-called foreign aid, half military aid. But the foreign aid was ridiculous. Israel was quite wealthy. It was doing better on some things than we were. So I think they realized, wait, this people are going to catch on that this is not legitimate. So slowly it phased out the foreign aid and went all just the same amount went to military aid, and then that's been increasing over the years.
Okay.
Now they want to give Israel another approximately $14 billion this year.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that
$14
bill
billion.
that looks like it's passed or going to pass somewhere. It's right on
Well,
the
past
cusp.
the Senate. Yeah.
Okay.
The House may hold it up.
Talk a little bit about your experience when you traveled to Gaza. What did that feel like, look like? Because you hear all the time about people going to Israel and the beautiful experience they have. You went to Gaza and West Bank, I believe.
That's right, to both of them. Just traveling around by myself
Hmm.
with my notebook and small camera. And I wasn't part of any delegation or guided tour. Most people go on some sort of tour.
Right.
And I just went by myself as a foreign journalist, foreign correspondent. Just thought, oh, I'll just go over there and see for myself what's going on. So I traveled around at a time. And remember, it's a little, when I landed, I did think, why am I doing this? I don't speak Hebrew, I don't speak Arabic. I'll get lost, etc. It's dangerous. I was in the middle of a region that was portrayed as very anti-American, portrayed as anti-woman, portrayed as anti-Christian. I found all of those things were really actually untrue. So I traveled around and I went into Gaza, and I saw in both the West Bank and Gaza, I saw places that were being shelled, that were just being shelled, and people that had been injured in Gaza, especially. I went to a neighborhood, a fairly large residential neighborhood that was just bullet riddled. These homes that held numerous families were in ruins in some cases, were bullet riddled. People came up, were very happy to see me. Crowds of people and children would come up to me when I was walking on the street and say hello, often in English, often, sometimes salam alaikum. And I would just tell them I'm an American journalist, just here to see what's going on, and they would always say welcome. So I would, in the hospitals, I saw lots of children who had been shot, often in the back because they're running away. I don't know if people realize this was actually, I'm talking now early 2001, before 9/11.
You saw children who were shot often in the back because they were running away. Would this be from IDF forces shooting children?
Yes, 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 yes.
Okay.
IDF forces would, this was before Hamas. Hamas didn't come into power until about 2005, 2006, 2007. So this was early 2001. Hamas was not in power. Not a single rocket had been fired from Gaza, which is the pretext now. And yet Israeli forces were invading at will. They call them incursions. These are Israeli, military invasions. Children had been shot. Gaza's very densely populated. So in a hospital, I remember seeing a boy that had been, a little boy, I think he was about 9 years old, had been shot in the head. I saw children that had been shot in the teeth and the back. I saw one boy who was a teenager, and I remember his parents were there, his mother especially, I remember. And I was talking to a doctor. The parents didn't speak English, but the doctor spoke very good English, as many educated Palestinians do. And so I asked him about their son, because I knew that sometimes there's some programs where people would, bring surgeons in to help injured people, perform surgery on them, or sometimes the injured person can be brought to the United States for medical care. So I asked him if maybe that could be done for the boy, that, maybe somehow I could go to one of those organizations that did that. I think it's the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund or something. And he said he had not yet told the parents. And this was in English with the parents there. And he said, I haven't yet told the parents, but their son is totally paralyzed. He was quadriplegic. And, that was fairly intense. And knowing that by that time, I knew that we were giving a massive amount of money and weaponry to Israel. So really, it was my tax money that they had used to shoot that boy.
Yeah.
When I've been back other times, I've seen more and more children that have been shot. I was in the house of a boy in the West Bank who had been killed, a 9-year-old. I was there just after the parents had come back from the hospital with bloodstains on them from holding their son. And he had just been killed by the IDF, the so-called defense forces that are not, these are very aggressive forces. People, because the media, the way things are reported, some people don't really know the geography and they think that the Palestinians were invading Israel. No, these are Israeli soldiers coming into Palestinian names and homes and neighborhoods at will, rounding up anybody they want, men, women, and children, holding them as long as they want without trial or charge. This is called administrative detention. Shooting people at will with impunity. This was back before Hamas, before rockets. It's been going on a long time.
Right. And that's all. And I'm going to link to your talk that you gave that first, enlightened me about some of these numbers and things, because I want people to know the pre-Hamas history. What we're told ad nauseum, especially in the Christian community or the conservative media, is that these children that are killed or injured, it is because that these forces, whether it be Hamas now or any controlling body of Islamic extremism, uses human shields, and that almost every time that you've got indiscriminate, it's not actually indiscriminate. It's because we're trying to get the bad guys. And it's retaliatory because a group like Hamas or before them attacked Israel first. So it's always Israel is the victim of an attack. And then this is retaliatory, and they're using human shields, be it children or otherwise. What would you say about that?
We always get the Israeli narrative. They're masters at it. They've been doing this for, I've written a book about this now. They've been doing this for over 100 years of misinformation and propaganda. We know past wars have propaganda. We know the Germans in World War I, who were just normal Germans, were portrayed as beasts that ate babies. Literally, there would be posters showing a rifle and a baby. So there's war has propaganda. All wars, I think, probably certainly all modern wars have propaganda, and Israel's a master of propaganda. On top of that, they have a lot of Israel partisans are very active in U.S. media. People are very afraid of being called anti-Semitic.
Yes.
The pro-Israel lobby is very powerful. People don't want to talk about that, but that's what I've discovered. Have billions of dollars that they use on behalf of Israel to influence the American population. This has been going on since the 1920s.
Well, since you just said that you've written a book on 100 years of them becoming masters of propaganda, one thing that shocked me, and this is just said in all earnestness and innocence, I came to this knowledge. I'm a guy that loved Dennis Prager and his politics. I loved Ben Shapiro. I never even thought about the fact that they were Jewish. I didn't even think about that. But then I looked up, CNN and their heads of state for CNN. And you mentioned somebody from NPR, and many of the masters of media on the left wing are either directly influenced by Israel, or they're Israeli themselves, or they have Jewish ties. And then on the right wing, I think of the big three. I think of, you got Ben Shapiro, you got Dennis Prager, and then you've got the one that recently defected from the New York Times for good reason, I think, Bari Weiss. And I'm just the Free Press. And I'm like, how in the world? Because the Jewish population in the United States is so small, Alison. It's like, I think you definitely would know, 2% or maybe a little less across the United States, give or take a percent. But they are in charge of both sides of the media. And I don't know how that is possible unless it was a coordinated effort to do so.
I don't know if, well, certainly to a degree it was a coordinated effort. I mean, certainly anybody that really is savvy, and many people are highly intelligent, but that doesn't mean that we're savvy or cunning or, no.
Right.
Um,
Two
but
different things, right?
that's right. And remember, I'm speaking about, from 23 years of looking into this issue. So I've discovered things along the way that I was sort of reluctant to discover. Um, it's not pleasant to really know the things about your country that are distressing and disturbing.
That's right.
And I'm very much opposed to all bigotry and, prejudice against people. But the fact is that there is really massive pro-Israel influence, to put it mildly, in our media. A number of the people I've looked into, for example, the reporting we get from the region itself. Often the reporters there and the editors who determine what we get from the Associated Press, the New York Times, etc., and that all of our media get. Often they're Israelis. If not they themselves are Israelis, their families are. Linda Gradstein, was an example of NPR. She's, I don't know if she ever took Israeli citizenship, but her children are Israeli. She's living in Israel. Her husband's Israeli. And I found that a number of the journalists, I mostly originally was looking into the liberal media. I wasn't even looking into Fox News, etc. Although I've now looked into that, and I think it's even worse there. But I would find that the bureau chiefs would have their sons actively serving in the Israeli military at the same time that they were reporting on the subject as though they were objective.
Mm-hmm.
This is a conflict of interest. This violates journalistic
That's right.
ethics.
That's right.
So a number of journalists actually not only have Israeli ties, they have Israeli family members serving in the military of one side of a conflict. And that's not, first of all, they shouldn't be on that beat. Second of all, if they are, that there should be a disclaimer announcing that. So I found that throughout the media, we have that type of thing.
What would you say, Alison, to the person that hears all this and they're sympathetic to what you're saying, especially pre-Hamas, but they're like, okay, Alison, I hear you on that, but Islamic extremism is a real thing, and they want to create an Islamic caliphate and their own version of a world order. And we have to fight back against that. And, the Hamas attacked and maybe 1,500 or 1,700 or more Israeli citizens were killed on October 7th of last year. What are they supposed to do now? What would your response be?
Well, it's hard because there's so many myths that when you're talking from, that's the established version that many people believe. So it's wrong on so many levels.
Okay.
It's hard to think where to start.
But that's the first question that I think people in my region that have the old mentality, they just go to that. Hamas attacked. It was really, really bad. Don't the Israelis have a right to defend themselves at this point?
Yeah, just starting from that level, and then we can get back to the caliphate and all that.
Yes, yes.
You just never hear that. It's, there are minuscule portions of every religion that are extremist and hold strange beliefs and not widely held beliefs. So there's Jewish extremism that's really astounding to learn about. That's actually quite active, more active. It's very influential, disproportionately influential in the Israeli government. But anyway, in terms of the Hamas attack, the attack on October 7th, first of all, people don't know that a few years before that, there had been massive nonviolent marches in Gaza every week for over a year and a half. Thousands of people, men, women, and children, gathered in this. There was going to be a Gandhian march. They announced it ahead of time. They had these big demonstrations every week, unarmed demonstrations, and every week people were shot, killed, and maimed. We were covering this at the time. Anybody could have known it. The U.S. media barely covered it at all, and when they did cover it, it was from the Israeli point of view. There was going to be a documentary about it that was still very Israeli-centric, but it did provide a lot of information. It was going to be broadcast by PBS. It got pulled. They claimed, it's postponed because, there's programming issues. It never, I would call them up and saying, well, why is it postponed when it's just temporarily postponed, it'll come up. They never showed it. This is PBS. This isn't Fox News I'm talking about. So there was this huge attempt to use nonviolence. Remember, again, most people, the majority of people in Gaza are families that were pushed out of their homes, their land, their homes, their businesses, violently by Israel in 1948. This was a violent ethnic cleansing of non-Jews, both Muslims and Christians. That's how Israel was established. That's how it came about. So a lot of those people ended up in Gaza, poverty-stricken. These are people, in many cases, that had land. A number of them were from right. I mean, they're from all over what's now called Israel, but some of them are from a fair number. Not surprisingly, are from the land that's now owned by Israel, just outside the Gaza borders. So you have the Gaza population literally imprisoned with barbed wire fences and a wall, imprisoning the population of Gaza. They cannot get in or out without permission from Israel. Sometimes children with very bad injuries or illnesses, just a normal illness that requires specialized treatment, are prohibited from leaving, and they die. Sometimes they're allowed to leave, but their parents can't go with them. So that you've got this imprisoned population. Just outside the population is Israel, where people are flourishing. They have, plenty of money, sometimes swimming pools, etc., living on the land that belonged to those people. Just outside the Gaza ghetto are Israelis living on their land, celebrating, enjoying life, while people in Gaza have been enduring an Israeli organized blockade that's gone on for over 15 years. And, there's major poverty. Some children are suffering growth stunting because of the lack of food. Often has been a lack of medical medicines, just regular medicines, sometimes X-ray film is scarce. This has been going on long before October 7th.
Sure.
So they finally tried to do this huge Gandhian march. They had been doing small ones every week in the West Bank and Gaza for years. I was there. I saw them. I was grabbed by some Israeli soldiers one time because I was filming what was going on.
Explain the purpose of
this.
Explain the purpose of the Gandhian March. Whose attention are they trying to get? What are they trying to accomplish?
The world. They're trying to get the world's attention, especially America, because they know. You see, we should realize this, that people in the region, in Palestine and throughout the Middle East, throughout North Africa, throughout the world, especially the Middle East, are very aware that our tax money is supporting Israel, that our government shields Israel from international efforts to stop what are truly violations of international law. So they know that the American government is doing that. What's lucky for us is they know, well, the citizens of a country aren't necessarily responsible for what the government is doing, because many of the governments over there are despotic. And so they give us a pass, even though in our case, we're a democracy and we do vote. So we actually are responsible. But they don't really hold the individual American responsible. But they know that the U.S. government is doing this. So they have had, they're aware of Gandhi. Everybody in the world is aware of Martin Luther King, the idea of having a nonviolent march, and that brings change because the world sees it. A nonviolent march has no power if nobody sees it.
That's right.
What it means is when you're a nonviolent marcher, anywhere in the world, probably in this country, you're beaten. At minimum, you're beaten. I remember the civil rights movement. I'm 76. I remember these things.
Yeah.
In Gaza and in the Palestinian territories, Gaza and the West Bank, they're not just beaten. they're shot quite often. They're sometimes killed. Some Americans taking part have been killed, taking part in unarmed marches.
Now you're
So this
talking. So
huge
so so
march,
explain how that happens. You've got a huge march in Gaza, not in Israel, right? And
that's right.
they're not
That's
being
right.
violent. And then you're saying IDF soldiers are coming in and picking people off. Is that
They
legitimately
were
what?
deployed. Yeah, they weren't coming in. There was a fence that, Gazans were marching near.
Okay.
Um, Israel heard about this, that there was going to be this huge demonstration. So they deployed 100 snipers and began shooting them. There's lots of video of this. Some of the video was broadcast at, I believe, at the United Nations. So there was lots of coverage of this. This should have been watched in real time, but the media barely covered it. I think it's clear most people don't even know this went on. Imagine if your city or your town or your state were imprisoned and you were marching to, about the fact that your land had been stolen, that your children are sometimes malnourished, that there's massive poverty, that medications are scarce, and you finally decide, okay, we'll all do this big march, without arms, without guns, without bombs or anything, and nobody knew about it. Nobody knew about it. So you're at the mercy of the opposition if nobody knows about it. So
It would
that went
be.
on. And, remember, these are, already by that time desperate because they're living in desperate conditions. Many people have legitimately called Gaza, the largest concentration camp on earth, the largest open air prison on earth, because Israel controlled the airspace, controlled the sea, controlled all the borders except the Egyptian border, where Egypt was their proxy and they would tell Egypt what to do. So they controlled, so all of Gaza is a prison. It's been that way for quite a while. It was there when I went there.
I can understand the type of anger that would foment over years and decades. There's no doubt. And then you're going to get extremist groups like Hamas that arise. But was Hamas, explain the politics of this, were they voted into power by the Palestinians? And on top of that, because what Hamas did on October 7th is still not the answer. Obviously,
Oh, no,
that's not the answer.
no,
So I don't want
that's
anybody
right.
to walk away thinking that that's what we're saying is that was a justified event. Absolutely not. But how did that come to be, and who funded Hamas?
Well, Hamas was elected. It won the election. The people went over and felt and saw that these were fair elections, and Hamas won the election.
Okay,
Remember, Hamas has a military wing and a political wing, like the U.S. government has a military wing, you might call it, and we've got the Pentagon, the Defense Department, and the rest of the government. So that's the same way in Palestine. Although the military wing doesn't have any jet planes, doesn't have any aircraft, doesn't have any ships, doesn't have any tanks. The military wing has minimal weaponry compared to a normal army, compared to Israel, which has thanks to our funding, one of the most powerful militaries on the planet. The
sure.
military wing of Palestine has almost nothing compared to that. Even if you look at October 7th, they were using hang gliders and pickup trucks and motorcycles. That's their military wing. Small arms, homemade rockets. So Hamas was the Fatah, which was the government before Hamas was elected, was considered corrupt. Things had gotten worse, conditions for Palestinians. Fatah had tried, there had been negotiations with Israel. Israel had never negotiated in good faith. We hear about the generous offer. There was no generous offer. All of this is misinformation. So just like in the U.S. government, you're unhappy, there's inflation or whatever it is, as we're seeing now, conditions are worse, finances are worse, your situation is getting worse and worse. Usually you vote for the other the other party. And Hamas was not considered corrupt. It was an alternative. I've never looked into this, confirm it, but I expect it's true. There are Christians in Gaza. A lot of people don't know that, and I think there's at least one Christian ran for office on the Hamas ticket. So they were elected. They've offered Israel. They've basically recognized that Israel exists, that Israel as a state exists. They don't recognize its right to ethnically cleanse them, but they do, recognize it's there. They've offered long time, years long, decade long peace with Israel. So again, we hear there are certainly extremist actions and statements by Hamas. We don't hear about all the rest of it at all. Again, remember, we're getting filtered information. It's like if you saw somebody beating up somebody and you didn't see, well, there are 20 people around that are beating up the person that you're seeing. It's all been whitewashed out of the picture. Right. I think conservatives are, often know that liberals are given the picture of conservatives that's often quite false, and vice versa. So we sort of know when that's done to us, but we don't know it's done against others the same way. In terms of getting to October 7th, which was I think everybody should, and probably does, but everybody certainly should condemn all killing all killing to me is terrible. Even if it's a soldier. I'm the daughter of a military officer. So even, we differentiate between civilians and soldiers, but all of those deaths are tragic. But so yes, all of us should condemn the fact that civilians were killed in Israel on October 7th. I think the number is around 800. A number of soldiers were killed. I think that number is altogether. We heard it was 1,400. Some people say more. It actually looks like it was about 1,100 people were killed on October 7th. Several hundred of them Israeli soldiers and security officers. We've heard exaggerated statements about what went on that have proved to be false. There was a report that got repeated by many news media, and I think by Biden, that 40 babies had been killed. In fact, they said 40 babies had been beheaded. Mm-hmm. That was totally false. The Israeli media have reported that was not true. So how many babies were killed, on October 7th? One was tragically killed. Do you know how many Gazan babies have been killed before and since October 7th? Thousands. These have all been documented. I remember there was a group called, I think it's Remember These Children, was started a number of years ago and showed the number of children killed among Palestinians and Israelis starting from 2001 and went up to about 2005. And the Palestinian children that have been killed are long, long columns. The Israeli children who've been killed, fortunately, were very short columns. So this has been going on so we hear again, one baby being killed is horrific to us. What about the fact that many, many, many babies among the other population were killed? And you didn't hear about those.
Let's talk about this number for a moment. I pulled up your website here, which ifamericansknew.org is the place to go to get all these. Two questions. Number one, from a technical perspective, how can you prove that your numbers are more correct than it's not propaganda? How do we know that we can trust this? Number two, let's talk about these numbers for a minute. It says 179 Israeli children have been killed by Palestinians. This is since September 29th, 2000, versus almost 15,000 Palestinian children. So first, the trustworthiness of the numbers, and second, the numbers themselves.
Well, I think that's a good question. I think that's exactly right. You should always look into the sources of information. We should always do that for everybody. So we make a great effort we really work very hard, and we're a tiny organization, but we work very hard to get our numbers as accurately as we can. So when you look at the website, you can click on most of the things, you can click on the number and it will take you to, yeah. And if you go down further, it'll show you where we got the number. Usually you can just click on the.
It says Israel Palestine timeline.org. Is that so?
That's
That's a
right.
source. Do you want me to click that?
Well, you could click that. That's actually us again.
Okay.
Because originally it wasn't that. We have a timeline where we're trying to include the name and photograph when we could of everybody that had been killed, both Israelis and
Oh man.
Palestinians.
So I see here it says view photos on the right. So you can actually view photos of the deaths?
Of a lot of them. A lot of the picture, a picture, sort of usually a headshot of a person who's been killed. But since October 7th, the numbers are so huge. It's been now, I think about 28,000 Palestinians have been killed since October 7th. 28,000 people in a few months. So there's no way we can keep up with that. Technically, we're trying to figure out, now we have the names of a lot of the people, but how can you put that many names in before we could put the names there, and
yes, it would be
now it's
impossible.
just very difficult to do. So, but we were keeping the names. We would often get them from the Israeli media, from human rights organizations there. So we would, we thought we just need to have all the people among both populations who were killed, when they were killed, their name, their age, the location where they were killed. So we were drawing on a lot of sources to get information from both Israeli and Palestinian sources, often humanitarian sources that are there. And people can, our numbers are really, really not questioned. So it's not that they're questioning our numbers. It's just that people don't tell the numbers.
Wow.
Nobody says, "Oh, that's the wrong number. Here's the actual number." One place where, some places where it's in dispute, we make extra effort to make sure we're getting it right. So in one of the hospitals, they've killed many people in hospitals, Israeli forces, since October 7th. They've attacked they've attacked churches, they've attacked schools, they've attacked many hospitals. One of the hospitals.
Speaking of church, I attended a church a couple of months ago, and the pastor said, whenever a hospital is, bombed, it's either an accident or that Israel has given them fair warning with, sirens and announcements. Leave. You need to, if you're a civilian, leave. You got to get out of here. Because there's tunnels of Hamas underneath, something along those lines. Is that the case? And if so, is that the case every time?
It's not the case. I mean, sometimes they warn people 5 minutes ahead of time and there's nowhere for them to go. Sometimes they tell them to go somewhere else. They go there and they're shelled on the way. Sometimes they get to the safe area and the supposedly safe area is then shelled as well. They keep, one way you can, I think, a valuable way to look into things is, okay, there's a dispute. Let in an international group, investigate, and discover what the facts are. Israel doesn't let in outsiders to come and investigate. If any American journalists get in, they are brought in and allowed by the Israeli military to only see certain things. They show them things, make claims about so-called evidence that nobody can validate. In one case, they showed a video. Look at this. Here's a chart that's Hamas chart about, military chart. They're very careless in that case because people that could read Arabic translated it was a calendar. They then took that out of their video and reissued it. So we're not allowed. There are not international investigations we just keep hearing, well, this is what Israel says. Israel reported, the Israeli military says. So if you look at the reports, often it's the Israeli military says, an Israeli spokesperson says, an Israeli officer says. Well, they can, that's not evidence.
Right.
And usually the evidence is lacking. People look into it and it's lacking. So it's not to say that we know for sure one way or the other, but we don't know for sure. But often there's preponderant evidence from what we can decipher from Palestinian journalists that are there and individuals. Remember, this is being live streamed. You can go to Instagram and Twitter and TikTok. And even though the internet has been very iffy in Gaza, Israel controls the electricity, they control the internet access, so it's been very, very difficult for people to have it. But there is some, so you see these, just people sending out their own just home. People everywhere now have smartphones and cameras and things. So you can see what's going on. You can see the really often grisly pictures of children who have been killed. Remember, when they shell someplace and destroy a home, a large, often there are buildings there because Gaza, the population of Gaza grew enormously when Israel ethnically cleansed much of the Palestinians, and many of them went to Gaza. So then they were living in tents at first. Then, thinking they would be able to go home because that's what normally happens with refugees. Well, they were never allowed to go home. So then the tents turned into concrete structures. And then they'd build another floor on top of that for their extended family. And then they'd build another floor on top of that and another floor on top of that. So when when they shell these structures, they're killing dozens of people, and many are buried under the rubble. So our numbers of 28,000 are probably low because there are thousands of people still buried under the rubble. So it's very difficult to know how many have been killed. But you can see videos and images of them digging out the rubble and finding a child under there, finding an arm under there.
I've seen
finding a woman. It's all anybody that wants to find the facts and has access to the internet and is skeptical. You just do the searches and you can find the facts. But when you rely on the media, you're going to get, it's unreliable. Sometimes we get good reporting, sometimes we don't. You don't know what you're getting just by looking at the reporting.
Yes.
And on this, all of the media tend to be Israeli-centric. Even the liberal media that's now gotten much better than it used to be, I feel, still we're getting Israeli-centric reporting there. When you really know what went on, you see the spin and you see the omission. We're getting spin and omission and Israeli talking points. Now, what we're not getting there are a number of Israelis who are actually speaking very factually and honestly about what's going on. You can go to Haaretz, there's Gideon Levy, there's Amira Haas. There are Israeli journalists who are very accurately and forcefully giving the facts in the Israeli media. So, but you don't hear from them.
Yes. Well, as a Christian, one thing that really bothered me, and I want to respect your time. If you've got 5 minutes, you have 5 minutes?
Yes, I do. Thanks.
Thank you so much. 2 questions. Number one, this is something that really bothered me. So, I believe in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John as the gospel. That's what we call, the gospels of Jesus Christ. And from the last guest I had on that was bringing to light some of these topics you're talking about for me and my audience, he said, Jeremy, Israel right now is using an artificial intelligence bombing campaign. And it's they tell the Palestinians, go here, and then they bomb that place, then go here, and then they bomb that place. And that's why you're seeing all these deaths. So it's an indiscriminate or on purpose bombing campaign using artificial intelligence. And they've named it the gospel, which I don't care if you're doing it for all the right reasons. No one should name a bombing campaign the gospel when it has to do with Jesus Christ. Have you heard that?
Yes, that's been reported. I think that's factual. Yeah. You'll find a lot of disrespect, to put it mildly, of Christians in Israel. among the Israeli government and the Israeli media. People don't hear that.
No.
There are sitcoms that make fun of Jesus in pretty offensive way, to put it mildly.
From a Jewish mentality, is that from
Yes.
perspective? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and I know if you get into to the not the Torah but the Talmud, it's going to have more of that approach toward other ethnicities, and to me, that's something Christians are so unaware of, is Talmudic thinking and the religion of the rabbis. We just think of it as, well, they just believe the Old Testament but not the New. They'll get there someday. So that may be a point to make it another time, because again, I want to respect your time. The last question I have has to do with land confiscation. So tell me about this chart right here, if you can see that, because to me, I feel like with every attack that Hamas or Hezbollah or any other extremist group does, in response, they lose land, power, and livelihood every time, it seems to me. And that Israel is really in no real danger of losing their land. In fact, it's almost like a positive thing for the geopolitics of Israel whenever an extremist Islamic group attacks, based on what I see here. What say you?
Yes, I think you're right. As this map shows what's going on. Imagine if that were the United States. That's what's going on to your land, and this is in my lifetime. When I was born, Israel didn't exist. It did not exist yet, and now this is what's going on. But so it does these violent attacks, which Hamas has. There have been violent attacks before October 7th. Nothing along that magnitude, of course. But anytime, our media studies showed that whenever an Israeli is killed, especially an Israeli civilian, which is very rare, fortunately, it gets major headline coverage. If an Israeli civilian is killed, we hear about it. We hear, usually there are follow-up news reports. We see their parents. Whereas Palestinians who are civilians who've been killed all along in far greater numbers, we almost never learn their names. We don't see their parents. We don't learn their family history. I mean, just yesterday, I believe it was, an American teenager living in the West Bank, Palestinian American, but he was a U.S. citizen, born in Florida, was killed. Did you see that? And were there any headlines about
No,
that?
I didn't notice a thing about it.
If that had
No,
been an American citizen in Israel killed, there would be headlines. By Palestinians, it would have been headlines.
probably.
This
Yeah.
is the another boy, another American was killed not too long ago by Israeli forces. So there have been two. American citizens have been abducted by the IDF, so a mother and her daughter, I believe it was, and their family. These are Americans. They have American citizens. The families don't even know where they are. Have any of these been headlines?
No.
So when something happens to Israelis that will make Palestinians look bad, it's headlines. All the numerous multitudes of cases where things have happened to Palestinians, and I'm including Palestinian Christians, Palestinian churches, both in the West Bank and Gaza, those are almost never mentioned in the U.S. media. I mean, I talked not long ago, and I'd like to, hoping maybe you can have on your show this. I talked to a woman who lives near my daughter, who's Palestinian Christian from Gaza. Her relative, her parents are still there. Her, I believe it was her uncle, had died not long before from dehydration. He was 36 years old. Conditions in Gaza are so bad. Medical care is so minimal. People are just, multitudes of people, thousands and thousands of people are saying, go here, go there. It's actually, now I think it's at least 1.5 million people are just, going from place to place, carrying their belongings. So this man died, not from shelling, not from a bullet, His conditions had gotten so bad they couldn't get him to care. And he's just one of many. And this is a Palestinian Christian. Her family attended one of the oldest churches in the world in Gaza, which Israel attacked. The other two churches that are in Gaza have all been damaged and attacked by Israeli forces. Even though people thought they would be safe. So, hundreds of people had gone to those churches, both Christians and Muslims together were sheltering there. They were attacked. Two Christian women in one of the churches were killed by a sniper, an Israeli sniper. What were the headlines?
Didn't see a thing about it, honestly.
It's astounding. I continue to be astonished at what's going on. But if people go to our website, go to our blog, we try to have the information there as much as we can keep up with it.
Yes, you guys are doing an amazing job with the information. The links to all of this will be in the description. Last question, I'll let you go. What Israel always says is Zionism is about our ability to have a nation state and to defend ourselves, to defend our borders. I don't think so. I think that there's something beyond that. What is Netanyahu and the global, not just Israel, the global powers that be, what are they after? What are they wanting with all of this?
I don't know. There are depths to this that are very disturbing. We haven't gotten into the Israel lobby. I think that's important for people. If you go to our website, you can see a list of it. But there's a lot of evidence that what they're trying to do is really push everybody out of Gaza. Now there's gotten so much world attention, maybe that won't happen. But that seems to be they're not trying to get Hamas. They're not trying to free the hostages. There are large demonstrations in Israel itself by the families who are furious at Netanyahu and the Israeli government because clearly getting the hostages is a low priority for them. They want to they claim they want to get Hamas, but really it appears they want to push everybody out of Gaza.
That's all right. I've kept you long.
I thought I turned it off.
That's okay.
I think people should, we've covered so much, but we could mention, because the hostages get so much news about the hostages. And deservedly, certainly if I had a family member that were being held by someone, I would be out there night and day doing everything I possibly could to get my family member back.
Right.
That's natural and human and appropriate behavior. What they're doing is they're furious at Netanyahu because he's not trying to do that. The Palestinians have made it clear that what they want is, I just referred to this earlier in the interview, but Israel's holding thousands of Palestinians prisoner, thousands. Right now, I think it fluctuates, but I think now it's maybe something like 7,000. Many of them, they've either had no trial at all, or the trial is largely a kangaroo court where it's stacked against you. But in several thousand cases, there are people who have not even been charged with a crime, and they have not been found guilty because there wasn't even a trial. So there are many, many Palestinian prisoners that are basically, you could consider them kidnapped. They haven't been charged with a crime, and they're being held in Israeli prisons, sometimes for days, sometimes for months, sometimes for years, sometimes for over 10 years or 20 years, no charge of crime.
Sounds like our January 6th political prisoners over here.
It's very much like that.
Amazing.
Very much like that. And this has been going on for a long time. So here you've got these captives being held in Gaza by Hamas and by other groups. Not all, this wasn't just Hamas. There were other groups that then, when they broke out of Gaza, lots of other people broke out too. Finally, they were freed for a short period of time. So you've got captives in Gaza being held by Palestinians, Israeli captives, and some foreigners. And you've got captives being held by Israel, Palestinian captives. So the Palestinians in Gaza, the Hamas, wants to do a prisoner exchange the Israeli prisoners that are being held in Gaza for Palestinian prisoners being held in Israel. This is what they'd like to arrange.
Mm-hmm.
Many of the hostage families are saying, do that. Do that. We want our family member back. But Israel won't do it. They did it once. An Israeli soldier was held, and I think they released, as I recall, and anybody can double check if my memory is correct on this one, I think they released 1,000 Palestinian prisoners for that one Israeli soldier.
Wow. See, we're
So
being told
prisoner
the
exchange
exact
is often done.
in our media and even the conservative Christian influencers that are out there trying to report on this, they're telling me the exact opposite thing, that Israel's doing everything they can to try to broker a hostage exchange and that Hamas simply will not do it.
Again, we're just getting what Israel wants us to believe. For one thing, apart from everything else, if you're trying to broker a hostage exchange, if you're trying to negotiate with somebody, do you kill massive numbers of men, women, and children every day? And supposedly you're trying to negotiate with a party? You would have much of the world, including the majority of Americans, want a ceasefire. A ceasefire would save lives on both sides. How can you not want a ceasefire? It would save, the small number of Israeli soldiers, invading soldiers that are getting killed, would not get killed. And the thousands, every day it's 100 to 200 Palestinians, largely civilians. Of the 28,000 Palestinians that have been killed since October 7th, I believe 20,000 of them are women and children. They're killing women and children. So wouldn't any human being who actually knew the facts want a ceasefire, stop the killing? And yet, our government hints that they want it, but they won't require it. Mm-hmm. Israel won't do it. These influencers, apparently are against it. And they pretend to be Christians and human. I'm sorry, I was raised Christian. And to me, that's not a Christian approach. Maybe I'm being unfair here, but
well, I think that many of them are misinformed, and they're told by their handlers, who oftentimes are controlled by Israeli interests, here's the truth. And they honestly are believing what they're saying. Just like many, lower level reporters on down the chain are just going to, they're going to read the teleprompter basically. Right.
That's right. That's right. I think, as you say, mostly people, I still like to believe that most people are decent human beings and want to behave in ways that are decent. So in most cases, most people just don't know the facts. On many issues, I'm sure that's the case. There are some people that are bad for whatever reason, but most people are acting on what they think is going on.
Right.
Now, at certain levels in the media, when you're talking about intelligent people with high salaries, large staffs, they have to know.
They know.
And there are people that I used to respect that I now, the power and the money, I think, is just too enticing. And they know better. Lower level people probably don't. But some of these people, I wonder if they do feel guilty about what they're doing.
I wonder.
Because some of them are not so gullible and so unintelligent and so uninformed that they don't have an idea about what's actually going on.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a matter of whether you're at a high level or low level, being willing to dig and do the research. And Alison, I guess it's a nonprofit, or is it nonprofit?
It's nonprofit.
Yeah, If Americans Knew is a phenomenal place to begin to dig, to begin to do the research. And hey, some of the rocks you may pick up and overturn as you dig may not be the things you want to see or want to hear, but we cannot act effectively if we do not effectively know the truth. So, Alison, I want to thank you so much for your work over decades of exploring these issues, bringing the truth to light, and helping us to make conscious decisions on what we're going to believe, do, and support. So thank you, Alison.
Thank you.
All right. We'll talk to you soon. I'll have you back on.
Thank you very much.